Yes, it works. Okay, I'm officially an I think I just found the most important setting for the autofocus in the R5 and the R3, and it took me 3 years to get to this point. So I've been using this camera since 2022, and if you follow this channel, you know that I spent a lot of time looking into every possible way of customizing the buttons and the controls to help me be faster and more efficient when shooting out in the field. One of the trickiest parts, it's always been how to control the autofocus and the different autofocus settings. And now I just realized I've been doing it wrong for this whole time. So you're surely smarter than me and you probably already know about this, but today I want to share this new way of customizing the AF on button, the one that we find here in the back. This new way of using it is a game changer for my photography and hopefully will be for you as well. In fact, with this system, we can use both the continuous autofocus mode and the single autofocus mode at the same time without changing any setting. So I've always been an advocate of using the AF on button instead of the shutter button to control the autofocus. This allows us for a better control of our camera while shooting, as we separate the control of the autofocus from the control of the shutter. I even made a full video about the old way I used to customize these buttons for what I thought it was complete control. I've been using this system for a very long time and it works great, but there is still one problem. I still find myself wanting to jump between servo autofocus or continuous focus mode and single autofocus. In fact, even with the most recent cameras like the R3, there are still situations where we have to go and change the way that the autofocus is behaving so that it can fit our situation. Of these ones, the setting that I find myself changing more often, like multiple times during a single session, is between the servo AF mode and the one-shot AF mode. Continuous autofocus means that the camera is continuously adjusting the focus to keep the subject in focus all the time. So it's tracking and moving continuously the focus of the lens, while single autofocus means that when we press the button, the camera locks the focus on the point we selected, and the focus will stay locked in that position until we trigger it again. For example, this is very useful when we are dealing with a landscape or something that is not moving. In a situation like that, the camera might struggle when it's in a servo or continuous mode because the camera is looking for something that is moving and not finding anything. Sometimes the autofocus would jump back and forth and create a bit of a mess. When I'm shooting wildlife, most of the time I am in servo focus mode, which is keeping my subject in track all the time, even if they are getting closer or further away from me. But there are some instances where I need to quickly switch to a single focus mode. For example, if I'm following an animal that is walking behind some bushes, I would have the risk of the focus locking on the bushes instead of the subject. Or maybe the opposite, if the subject is very small, the autofocus might not recognize it and just jump in the back. The problem is that if I have to enter the menu and navigate around to change this setting every time, it takes often too long, and by the time I'm done with my setting, the subject is already gone. I experimented a lot of ways to solve this problem in the past. For example, in my R3, I set this custom button to change between servo and autofocus mode so that while shooting, I have it here all the time and I can quickly switch. On my R5, I set this function on one of these buttons here in the back, but it's still not perfect because a lot of times I would forget the autofocus set to the wrong mode, and then suddenly some action happens in front of me, I grab the camera, I shoot, and everything is out of focus because the focus locks on something and instead of tracking the animal. So it took me a while, but finally, after years, I found this new feature that it's probably been there since the release of the R5, so for a very long time now. So the first thing is we go into the menu and we set the AF operation to servo AF. AF method must be in tracking, and the subject to detect, well, that depends on what you're doing. For me right now is animals, but it works with any mode. Eye detection right now is enabled, but also that is a setting that I customize, and I can trigger on and off all the time with a button here, because sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. Then we have to navigate to the customize button menu, and on the shutter button in photography mode, we have to set it on metering and AF start, so that when we half press the button, it triggers the autofocus and the metering, and then when we press all the way down, it triggers the shutter. Next, we have to go on the AF on button, and here is the trick, because we have to set it to metering and AF start as well. And this is what I used to do in the past. But then if we use the info button, then we access this extra layer of customization of what type of autofocus features the AF on is actually triggering. So this is the default setting. That means that when we press the AF button, we trigger the autofocus system with whatever setting was already in place. But here is where we should customize, and I would set the AF operation to one shot and the AF method to spot AF. The Servo AF characteristics, we can leave it like so because we are not using it, as this is set to one shot. And by applying these settings, let me exit this. So with these settings in place, what happens is that when I press the shutter button, I trigger the autofocus in servo mode with auto subject tracking, which is good for most of my wildlife photography. Whenever I need to switch out of that and manually select the point where I want to focus and lock the focus there, I can press the AF on button and I have the single focus. If you're finding these tips useful, make sure you grab my free 100-page wildlife photography ebook. It dives even deeper into exposure, camera setting, and in-field techniques. Check it out, you'll find the link in the description down below. Also, if you want to see more tutorials like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Let's now see how to do the same with the R3 that has some slightly different autofocus modes. So we go to the autofocus menu, we set the autofocus on servo. In this case, we don't find the tracking available in these modes because the tracking is always on in the R3. Subject tracking here is on, the subject is still animals, eye detection is enabled. We move to the bottom customization menu in here, and so the shutter button is triggering. In this case is also triggering the eye control that is available in the R3, but all the other settings are triggered as well. And then we go to the AF on button and then press the info button. And here you can see I can select many more options to choose from, but what I want this button to trigger and to change is the AF operation. I want to trigger this and I want this to one shot. Then we have the AF area that I leave on spot AF, which is the smallest and most precise focus area that I can access. I turn subject tracking off and also the subject to detect, it's off. On the R3, this is basically the only way that I have to force the camera to focus somewhere different from the subject, because if I leave the tracking and the subject on, then it would just lock on whatever subject it can find. Spot detection is not triggered, eye detection is off. Again, this is the same. It allows me to use the shutter button for most of the time, but whenever I want to force the camera to lock either on the subject or in any other point, I can press the AF on button and it will lock there. I am pretty sure there is a way to do the same also in the high-end Sony and Nikon cameras. So if you're using a different camera brand, just experiment a bit. I'm pretty sure you will find a way to do the same. And this technique is extremely powerful to make sure you always have the focus where you want. However, if you're shooting with long telephoto lenses, this might not be enough. In fact, sometimes the focus would jump to the background when you have a subject that is very, very close, or maybe the opposite, it would lock on something closer, like some grass or some branches, and it might take a while to force it back. To avoid that, we must use what might be the least used feature of our big and expensive telephoto lenses. It's a function that allows us to preset the focus in a certain position and recall that position instantly at any time. I made a full tutorial on how to use it and how to make the most out of it, so make sure you go and check it out before your next photography mission.